Hello there once again, and welcome to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett, along with Kent Myers. We're here every week discussing current events, meeting some interesting people, and this week, an interesting person who's going to talk about current events.
Yes, the Honorable Drew Edmonson, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the state of Oklahoma, is going to be with us. He's going to be telling us what's going on with his office, what activities they're engaged in. They're spread pretty thin, got a lot going on. I think it'll be a fascinating show, and it isn't often enough we get to hear from the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the state, but this show we are pleased to be able to have him with us again.
Some specific issues that we're going to discuss. The poultry industry is kind of under fire, and an issue between the state of Oklahoma and the state of Arkansas. All of that and a lot more coming up from Drew Edmonson, the Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma. We'll be back with that part of the show right after this.
For one Oklahoma-based company, success didn't happen overnight. Initially, the days were long, 80-hour weeks common. As we grew, we wanted to share our success, and the ideals of corporate and civic responsibility found a welcome home. Today, we're the largest investor in the Sooner State and a source for exciting, new, high-quality jobs. We're Chesapeake Energy, committed to building a better Oklahoma.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
Hi, I'm Court Diffie. With all of the change that has taken place in the car industry in the past decade here in Oklahoma, it's hard to find a family-run business anymore. One of the things that makes us different, that if you visit any one of our 3 locations, you're going to find one of our family members there ready to help you. Does that really make any difference? We really believe it does. So I invite you to come out and experience the Diffie family difference and decide for yourself.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce our guest.
Once again, we're pleased to welcome back to the set of The Verdict the Honorable Drew Edmonson, the Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma. Drew is a 3-time Attorney General. He did his undergraduate work at Northeastern State University at Tahlequah, his law work at the University of Tulsa. He has been a legislator, a district attorney in Muskogee County, and when he was serving in that capacity, he was also president of the state of Oklahoma's District Attorneys Association. He is, since becoming Attorney General, has just recently been relieved, or finished his term, I should say, as president of the National Association of Attorneys General, a nationwide organization. Drew is a Vietnam veteran. As I say, has been on The Verdict a number of times, and we're sure glad to have you back. Thanks for giving us your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I did complete my whole term, as my whole year as president of
the
National Association. They didn't kick me out or anything.
Hey, I want to jump in and talk about the poultry litigation case, but let's start at the beginning. For the person who doesn't know anything about this subject, tell the Oklahoma viewers what they need to know.
Well, essentially, we're not talking about Uncle Henry and Auntie Em having chickens out in the barnyard. These are major operations, major companies. It's a multi-billion-dollar business. Poultry house today, where it used to have 200 or 300 birds, will have 25,000, and they'll turn over 5 times during the course of a year. Well, that many birds creates a great deal of what we politely refer to as poultry litter. Poultry litter is high in nitrogen and phosphorus and makes a great fertilizer, except the land, and we're talking primarily about the Illinois River watershed right now, the land simply has all the phosphorus and nitrogen it can handle. So as they continue to apply this poultry litter to the land, it's running off into the streams and causes what the OSU biologists refer to as eutrophication. That is essentially excess growth in the water that clogs it, kills it, deprives it of oxygen, and ultimately Lake Tenkiller, the Illinois, Barren Fork, Flint Creek will be dead streams. And that's what we're trying to prevent.
Are these chicken houses or chicken farms in Arkansas or in Oklahoma or both?
They're both. There are about 1 million acres in the Illinois River watershed, divided about half and half. We have about 500,000 acres and about 500,000 acres in Arkansas. But the poultry houses are not so evenly divided. We have around 500 in Oklahoma, and there are over 2,000 in Arkansas. So most of the litter is being generated across the border, where our state environmental agencies, DEQ and the Agriculture Department, can't touch them. So we're in federal court in the Northern District of Tulsa asking the industry to take responsibility for the safe removal and disposal of the excess poultry litter. That which the plants cannot use needs to be removed from the basin to safeguard the rivers.
Well, I know there's been a good bit of publicity about this litigation, but there was a lot of talking and negotiation before litigation was ever filed by the state of Oklahoma.
Oh, heavens, yes. My first in-person discussion with the poultry industry was November of 2001, and it was at Gilcrease Museum up in Tulsa, right before the city of Tulsa filed similar litigation over their reservoirs at Lake Uchee and Lake Spavinaw. And I've had meetings with them since then in Oklahoma and Arkansas. We've utilized a retired federal judge as a mediator. We have done everything that we could to try to get the industry to accept and assume responsibility for the safe disposal of the litter. And finally, in June of this year, I gave up on the talks and filed litigation. We had one more session after that in August of this year, and it failed. And at that time, we issued summons and we're preparing to go to court.
This just seems attorney intensive. Is this something you can handle in your office, or do you need to hire outside counsel to represent the state of Oklahoma? How do you handle that?
Well,
and how do you compensate those attorneys?
We could have handled it internally. When I was first talking with the industry, I only asked two things: to assume responsibility for the removal of that amount of litter that could not be safely applied, and to have that agreement codified in a consent decree. We could have handled that internally without hiring any outside counsel at all. But we did not have the resources to pursue this multi-billion-dollar industry without outside assistance once it got to the point where we had to file a lawsuit. The millions of dollars that is going to have to be spent in discovery, preparation, litigation, depositions, everything else you do in a huge lawsuit like this would dwarf the budget of the Attorney General's office, and we had to go outside for help at that point.
And basically, what was the arrangement? You put it out for a bid.
We put out an RFP, a request for proposal, and we had several criteria in our RFP. Number one, that in no event would this litigation cost the taxpayers of the state of Oklahoma anything. All expenses would have to be borne by whatever law firm took this on. Second, it would have to be on a contingent fee. We were not going to pay legal hours or legal salaries during the pendency of the litigation. And finally, the contingent fee ultimately was set at a third plus expenses. But we have a provision in our contract that the combination of legal fees plus expenses cannot in any event exceed 50% of the recovery. So, the law firms could very easily go in the hole on the contract that they've signed, but we did execute an agreement with several law firms operating together to carry out this litigation.
So as I understand the complaint of the state of Oklahoma, it isn't that you want the chicken ranches or farms or whatever they're called shut down.
No.
You just want the waste that comes from those disposed of in a way that isn't hazardous to Oklahoma's water.
That is correct.
And that's just a matter of dollars, I would guess. Trucking it out or
moving it out of the basin. There are a wide variety of very inventive things that can be done with this litter, including using it for energy, to actually taking it, putting it in a facility, burning it, and converting it into electricity. There have been proposals made to pelletize it, sell it nationwide in a form that can be used in places that are not sensitive in terms of their watershed. They could move it to western Oklahoma and find many places, or northern Oklahoma, and find many places where it could be used safely and very effectively. But all of that costs money. The individual growers, the farmers out there, can't afford to do this. They're operating on a margin that would make it impossible for them to pay the expenses to ship it out of the basin. But the companies can. Even if they have to increase the price of a chicken by a nickel, they can do that and finance clean water in Oklahoma.
We've got about 45 seconds left in this segment. Why don't you fill it up with telling us where the case is today? How is it progressing?
Well, our case is filed in the Northern District of Tulsa. We have issued our summons. The defendants have all been served. They have responded by filing third-party claims against 161 Oklahomans, saying that they are also contributing to the pollution of the Illinois River watershed. We will file a motion to take those 161 out. That's not what this litigation is about. At the same time, the Arkansas Attorney General filed an original action in the United States Supreme Court asking the United States Supreme Court to bar Oklahoma from proceeding on this litigation. And we've got 60 days to respond to that. So there's lots of litigation, and we will handle that internally. The Attorney General's office will handle that pleading.
We're visiting with the Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma, Drew Edmonson. We'll be right back on The Verdict. Enjoy.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
And Blankenship has stopped at the line of scrimmage. No gain on the play. Leaving it 4th and 7 on the Tiger 46-yard line. 38 seconds on the clock. The Tigers have no choice but to go for it. Wiggins ended his kicking. Here's the snap. And the kick is away.
RSM McGladrey. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. RSM McGladrey. In Oklahoma City, the phone number is 405-843-5311.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers. Our guest on this show is Attorney General Drew Edmonson. We spent the first segment talking about this Arkansas chicken litigation issue. How large of an issue is this? I mean, how many chickens, what's the rate here that our Oklahomans should be concerned about?
Well, I mentioned earlier on the segment how many farms there are in Oklahoma and Arkansas. To give you an idea, the phosphorus that's generated by those farms in the Illinois River Basin alone, and keep in mind there are fewer than 200,000 people living in that basin, would be the equivalent of the untreated sewage of 10.7 million human beings. So it is a huge issue, huge amount of phosphorus going down, not to mention the other constituent chemicals in the poultry litter. And if you live over there, if you've ever floated the Illinois River or swum in Lake Tenkiller, it's a huge issue.
We know you're tied up pretty considerably with that litigation, but I know there are other things going on out at your office. Your office just didn't shut down when this poultry litigation started. What other major things do you want to tell the people of Oklahoma about what you're doing?
Well, our multi-county grand jury unit is still involved in the prosecution of Carol Fisher. He has not yet gone to trial, but we anticipate that happening shortly. And springing from that, the continuing investigation of the bribe. You know, Carol Fisher was accused of accepting a $25,000 bribe. Well, every bribe has both a receiver and a briber. And we're continuing that investigation, and having some difficulty getting the full cooperation of the courts down in Texas on that. They keep changing judges on us. We finally get a judge convinced, and the defense team runs over and gets another judge to interfere with that. The ongoing projects of the office are just fun to work with. I've been doing a series of tours on open meeting, open record. I will be going this week to Lawton, Oklahoma for one of those. We have one in Oklahoma City December 7th out at Metro Tech from 1 to 4, inviting state agencies in, commission members, board members, to learn more about our Open Meeting and Open Records Act. So there's lots of stuff going on, Corporation Commission, litigation. We actually defend more lawsuits than we sue every time the state of Oklahoma gets sued. And our Consumer Protection Unit going into the holiday season will be very busy, I'm sure, with holiday scams.
Sounds like you're busy.
We stay busy.
You represent most all of the Oklahoma boards and state agencies as well, do you not?
Well,
unless they have their own counsel.
Exactly. We represent all of them. Some of them don't call on us very often, either because they don't have any problems or they do have their own counsel.
And how many assistant attorneys general do you have?
I have a total of 70, and the largest section in the office is exactly that, their general counsel section that advises state agencies, boards, and commission. And the chief of that section is Gay Tudor, who is going with me on this tour on Open Meeting, Open Records.
I believe you're up for election, 2006. Is that right?
Is it that time already?
Hate to break it to you. What are your plans?
We should have told you earlier.
Well, it's getting, I haven't made a formal announcement. And
well, now's your time.
I was up in the press room at the Capitol on another issue, and one of the reporters asked me if I was running again. I said, well, I guess so. I'll announce right here. I have a 2006 campaign committee. We've already started fundraising, and so if the good Lord's will and the creeks don't rise, I will be a candidate for re-election next June. They've moved filing up. It's no longer in July. It'll be in June this year.
How do attorney general races differ from the typical political race? You've obviously witnessed a lot of races through the years and through your family. How is it different?
Well, there are some differences. Of course, depending on what kind of race you're in, different people get interested. Lawyers are interested in who the Attorney General is, whether they ever do business with the state or not, because they kind of look at that as their office. You know, it's the chief legal officer for the state of Oklahoma. So lawyers are interested in who the AG is. Aside from that, we typically don't get involved in the big policy issues that you see in governor races and even legislative races, because there's not a whole lot we can do about building highways, not a whole lot we can do about school funding, not a whole lot we can do about corrections. We mainly talk about where the Attorney General does have authority, representing the people of the state and the interests of the state. And when you've got an incumbent running, you know, that will be the battleground. What kind of record have I compiled, and where have I made mistakes, and whether a challenger could have done it better.
Well, do all states elect their attorney general, or is it an appointing anywhere?
About 45 of them elect them. 5 or 6 are appointed. In Tennessee, the Supreme Court appoints. In most of the states where the Attorney General is appointed, it's by the governor. They just had an election in New Jersey. The governor there will appoint a new Attorney General for the state of New Jersey. And in Maine, the legislature elects the Attorney General. But the model across the nation is independently elected, independent of the governor, and typically in a partisan election. I'm not sure why, you know, because whatever the Attorney General is, really doesn't deal with the partisan kinds of issues that the governor and the legislature do.
Let me ask you a question. I don't know how much time we've got, but let me ask you a question about the death penalty. I just recently saw a report that indicated that nationwide in this last year, the number of people executed has gone down. And that apparently has been part of a trend for a year or two. Would you know why that was happening? Because there were a number of years when it was going the other way. Do you have any thought about that?
Well, sociologists give all kinds of reasons for it, and you know, you can take statistics and argue, you know, cause and effect all day long. Death penalty proponents will say, number one, it's because we've been executing people, and that sends a message. Secondly, that we've been locking up a lot of violent offenders, and have been for a decade or more now, and that cuts down on the crime rate. And sociologists will also argue that when the economy is getting better, that violent crime tends to go down. I think it's probably, more than anything else, the analogy of the pig moving through the python. A snake swallows a large animal, and you could observe that animal going through the snake. We went a long time with no executions. So we had a huge backlog, death row in Oklahoma and every other state that had a death penalty statute. Those cases that all stem from 1975, 1976 laws and convictions that occurred in the 80s or very early 90s, all were reaching the end of their appeals at about the same time. So we had a huge spike in the number of executions. Oklahoma at one point led the nation in the number of executions, for good or ill. Well, we've passed that bubble, and now it's getting back to more reflective of the number of actual prosecutions and convictions and sentences that we have at the front end.
Not a diminished intensity on the part of the district attorneys to not seek the death penalty.
I don't think so. Somewhere along the line, I think in the 1980s, we passed the life without parole. And so, some argue that that has an effect, another sentencing alternative for juries. But I don't know. I'm not going to play cause and effect. I read the same article you did and noted that Ohio jumped into second place, and I hadn't seen Ohio in those statistics before. It's been Texas, Florida, Virginia, and Oklahoma, and I expected the same thing. Ohio's bubble hit. And they're in second place now, and they'll probably disappear next year.
Going to have to jump in here. We are out of time. Drew, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time.
Had a great time.
Thank you very much.
Kent and I'll have a final word when we get back.
That land next door was a mess. Take more than a lawnmower to revive that land. I heard the oil and natural gas people was cleaning up old oil sites, and it wouldn't cost us a plug nickel. Oh yes, sir, it was quite a revival. The whole church showed up, want to make a playground for the kids. It sure is a blessing.
Bringing out the best in each student. That is the simple goal and tradition of Heritage Hall. The focus on the individual shapes the educational experience at Heritage Hall. Each student benefits from small classes, able, dedicated teachers, a solid academic curriculum, and exceptional co-curricular programs of athletics, arts, community service, and other activities, parental involvement, personalized counseling, and the development of responsibility, integrity, and love of learning. If you want education taught with pride, then you want Heritage Hall.
Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're wrapping up our show with Attorney General Drew Edmonson.
Always good to have the Attorney General on. He's got an interesting, busy job, and it's good to check in with him from time to time to see what's going on. Talked a little bit about the death penalty, and next week we'll have a debate about whether we should have the death penalty or not, and a poll where you can vote after we do the show.
Had a couple of websites that we want to give to you so you can get more information on the verdict and also on the Attorney General's office. And there you see our website, theverdict.tv, and there oag.state.ok.us. You can get more information on Drew Edmonson and the Attorney General's office down at the State Capitol building. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next week on The Verdict.